Okay, I'm gonna do this as a brief summary more than the regular reviews that I tend to do for Fall of Rome here, because I couldn't even make it through one scenario. And yeah, the rules are every bit as bad as you might expect, given this is the first edition of the SPI game that had the, sort of most hate about the rules out of any. I had to do it. I don't know. I may have picked this up. I think I picked this up at Consim World, to be honest. The one thing that I can say, I understand that the later version, the rules are better. But the one thing I can say is I think the graphics on this, and especially non-glossy counters, are far superior. But there's no reason to use this old rule book. Apparently there's a PDF that puts the rules together between the rule book and the almost as many rules in this little addendum or errata card. But that's not what stopped me. What stopped me is really there's a fair amount of burden in playing any solitaire game. The rules are more complex and hence more prone to the errors. This was kind of the first one that they tried to write as a solo game, I think. Because you have to play something that kind of simulates some kind of play by another player. It has to give you some kind of challenge, right? In some types of solitaire games, you're just relying on the randomness of cards, etc., whatever's coming up, and all you can do is kind of estimate, hey, what are my odds of this? This goes a little bit different. It follows kind of a chart-driven side of things in terms of the randomization. That works fine, although it's dry. You'd rather have a big old deck of cards or all kind of neat things happening. There's not much excitement to what's showing up in it. But what really kills it is this very detailed procedural set of rules to dictate how you handle the various non-player assets and how they're going to move and what they're going to do. And this is what always kills a solitaire game, right? Because you have to bake in not only whatever complexity that the game is trying to simulate, whatever details that it's trying to simulate, the complexity that's inherent in those. Let's try to get the wording a little bit better. But you have to also put it in a way that it's not being driven by another person's decisions. That the decisions that are being made, are both historically reasonable and are not, trivially defeatable. I only played the first scenario, which is very, 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 very easy, I think. I think the later ones are probably more difficult, I'm hoping. But even in that first scenario, it's possible that a bad die roll at the end of it can just foil all your plans. And this is very much like, as you work your way through a deck of cards in a solitaire game, just the way the last couple cards could be arranged could screw you up or give you a win or whatever right away. And basically what you do as a player in these solitaire games is you try to figure out the mechanisms that you play by that will counteract the rules, the prescribed mechanisms that the game plays by, right? You try to improve your odds at any given moment the best you can. And it's all fucking calculable. And, it's not going to pull anything off. It's not like it's calculable over a really broad and complex span. It's calculable over, okay, what are the chances that there are going to be a large number of Germans? Do I have to worry about that? Do I have to worry about this? The more randomness there is on stuff like that, and I think things like Galactic Empire kind of do that a little bit, the more uncertainty you have, and you don't know how to apply your calculations and figure out exactly what you want to do, to optimize your chances. But something like this is actually right about at that level where I feel like the player can do a significant amount of analysis, the kind of analysis that people do on games like Monopoly or Rail Baron, and just kind of break the game in the sense that you could essentially, you wouldn't even have to do all the analysis. You could have a computer doing the analysis in real time as the game is being played, and determine your most likely effective move, your best move. That's not what I want to do. I don't want to be able to write a simple computer program that can more or less pre-calculate what my odds are of certain things happening and then making a determination just based on them. That's certainly not what I want for a competitive game. So as a competitive, solitaire experience, it's not rich enough to prevent that kind of calculation from happening. Now, if it's just me doing it in my head, I probably can't hold it. But it comes close. It really does. And I can make some broad choices of that nature. Then the other side of it is, the other side of solo play is, does it tell a great story? And this is kind of the B52 or B17 concept, and Ambush does that as well, although that has a unique system for it. Silent Hunter or whatever tries to follow that type of thing. B17 is sort of the purest form of it, though. There's basically no decisions for the player. All you're doing is watching the story unfold. And for me, that's also unsatisfactory, but again, I see where there's an appeal there as well. And my feeling on this is, no, it doesn't tell a very interesting story. One, it doesn't tell one that's historically accurate. There's gamey things you do, and I discovered one at the very least, that just don't correspond to anything historical. Like continually running back and forth between two locations to distract your enemy, because they can't defend, they can't do anything clever at all. All they can do is follow this fixed procedural set of actions that are pre-recorded, essentially. Anyway, and they just react to what the player does. So you can control what the enemy does if you understand the rules well enough. And this is where it gets difficult. In some cases, I figured it out for the Persians, that was easy. But in some cases, the rules themselves, being written in a procedural format, are hard to grasp what particular things you'd want to do. And again, if you spent the time writing a computer program to play the game, that would be about the same time as writing out some kind of detailed thing to help you really grasp and internalize what the barbarians are going to do, rather than trying to read and figure it out. Anyway, to me, there's just nothing satisfying about this game at all. But then again, I don't like solo games in general. The few that I like really shine in something other than, can I beat this game? Can I win? And unfortunately, the design of solo games is often torn between a couple of things. One is, we want to make it challenging so people who like solo games can have a challenging experience. So you want them to be configurable for this reason, but you kind of want it to be challenging. So this is my problem with the States of Siege game I played. It's too challenging. I just want to sit back and enjoy maybe the story. And I have to say, even Ambush is too challenging. I generally tended to win the scenarios, but lost so many team members in it that I never got that campaign flavor going. And maybe if I was more careful in my play, I could do a better job. But I don't want to play more carefully when I'm just there watching the story. It's kind of interesting. The computer game I'm playing right now, Life is Strange, you barely control anything. You're just watching this. It's like those Japanese sort of story games, which I hate, actually. But this is presented in a better way, where it looks like it's giving you it's giving you the choices in a way that it looks like it's working, a little bit better. But you're not going to impact the overall story. You're going to face it in a way, even when you're playing something like a Baldur's Gate or something, where there's a lot of tactical stuff, when you look at the story is prefixed. You either win or lose, and you just get kind of this ending at the end. It's the in-between stuff, how much it presents something that feels like a story, or how much it presents challenges that are of interest. Well, to me, this presents a challenge that's false. One that I could write an algorithm, essentially, that could do a better job than I could. And that may be the case for most games. Although the bigger and more complex it gets, the harder it starts getting towards, yes, I can write an algorithm that will optimize by playing this. And this may be part of my problem with things like Ancient Battles Deluxe. I feel like I could pretty much write something that could play the game better than I could. Again. And that's how I feel about chess, too. I wouldn't be shocked if I could write a chess or Go program that can play better than I can eventually. Not that I'm a particularly good player of anything. Anyway, I certainly I made a Konami game that could outplay me, but Konami is solved, so that's a little different. What about for other people, though? For people who enjoy solo games, I don't think this is terrible. If you're willing to put aside that, do I have decisions that I have to make that maybe if I think about them, X amount, instead of the most I could possibly work on them, I can still have a pretty good time and still be kind of challenged and everything. Yeah, I think this is up there. Any game, probably falls to the blade of, I could write an algorithm or a very careful set of analysis leading to an algorithm that will, make me able to play very much better. Certainly almost any solitaire game would, where there's complete knowledge of what, the possibilities in the game are. And that's where Ambush kind of shines, is that it's meant to be played once, and you don't know what you're facing, so you can't create an odds table. Or if the odds table is so big that you really have no useful information entering the game. This is kind of like the events tables in Europa Universalis, which is not solitaire at all, but where you're just getting battered by stuff happening. You can't look at simple charts and say, yeah, well, I can figure out the odds of this, and I can figure out the odds of that. You just have so many different things, and you don't want, and somewhat the CDG type style of play, or the cards, to some extent, you don't want to have that knowledge, so you hide from it. You don't go and analyze it. But you do go and analyze these fucking charts that are right in front of you, because how can you not? Well, that may be more of a psychological problem for me than it is for others. The same way that I have no problem splitting my brain into different opponents, and that provides me with much richer play that's a lot more interesting than any solo game can, where we're looking at competition. But, that's a feature of my brain. A feature of another person's brain might be just not to think about the fact and not to be bothered or worry about the fact that, yes, I could calculate out this game and, hand you a working solution that is probably going to play better than any human would. At least any human who didn't basically write themselves a program to play the game. Anyway, I can't see anything to really complain about it as this type of solo game, except for the rules itself. This is just not my kind of game, and I shouldn't have picked it up because I knew what it would be, but the fact that it's on my list, that it had a lot of numbers on it, 57 thumbs or something like that, I wanted to give it a shot, and yeah, it's still not, it's a solo game. It's funny, and I've said this many times, I enjoy playing solo style games better with other people or helping, running it for another person than I do playing it solo. In fact, if there's any games in which I feel a giant jump um, in that solo versus two player, it really comes to the games that are designed to be solo or cooperative and play. I really enjoy in a couple of players. I enjoy that conversation about the strategy. Not trying to force my own necessarily, sometimes kind of maybe being a little snarky about, well, that's not the right thing to do, you know, and giving my advice or whatever, but I also kind of enjoy watching that play out and my doom and gloom coming true or not, you know. And then having to argue why it was still not the best move, even though it won the game or whatever. I get none of that out of playing the game completely solo. Like, there's this wonderful social thing that happens when facing, when you have this shared cooperative facing of a problem and how to solve it, and tearing down the other person's solution and trying to promote your own and them doing the same with you and trying to come to a decision that's optimal in that way rather than being faced with, well, do I just kind of play with one hand tied behind my back, which is certainly more pleasant, or do I try to bring the full analysis to bear? And I don't feel any of that compulsion when I'm playing it with someone else. I feel like because it's social, and I don't feel with the two-player games, I feel much less is added when you're playing an opposed game, with a few exceptions. There are games like Midway where the game relies so heavily on hidden information that it's not a lot of fun to play solo. It's just kind of like, I'll play this opposed, right? It's just not in my solo rotation usually. Anyway, said what I said, and I ain't gonna say it again, and no more. I don't know. But, yeah, one thing, I wanted to actually start this with this. Every now and then a game breaks me. Last year, it was Vietnam. It just made it so I didn't want a game anymore. This one did it this time. Yeah, the rules certainly impacted that, the pain of dealing with the rules. This was much, much less time. I may recover much quicker. While I was playing Invasions, you'd say, why didn't that break you? Well, because I had the model from how I got out of Vietnam's breaking me, which was come down here and play little things in between the turns, and we'll see if we make it through or if we give up, whatever. But I did not feel I'll move a piece. Yeah, I'm just sick of this. With Invasions anywhere near the way I did with Vietnam. And with this, I have to push through a turn, even though they're tiny little turns, just because I just don't give a shit. And that's really where the breaking comes, is, do I give a shit anymore? This is repetitive, like Vietnam. Doesn't tell a very interesting story as far as I'm concerned. It's not that I don't find, the barbarian invasions interesting necessarily. It's just, I don't think this tells a great story about them. It's not in that level of detail. It's in the level of detail of a competitive, semi-historical game. Anyway, it just, and maybe Invasions and playing that over the time that I did led up to this being able to break me. Because this is such a small game. one of the things is I couldn't walk away from this and do something else the way I could with Barbarians or with, with Invasions or with Vietnam. I couldn't walk away and play something else as sort of my, this is your treat for doing this, because this whole thing is like a turn in Invasions, you know, in terms of the amount of time it would have taken. Taking breaks of like a whole day between the turn just doesn't make a lot of sense. Anyway, I was ready to quit this video a little while ago. Let's quit it for real this time. And I don't know if I'm going to play anything soon. I got to get to 1817 at some point, but I've got 2 computer games to finish now.